Good afternoon. I would like to welcome the audience, and in particular our speakers, to this edition of the MCA Around the World webinar series. A brief explanation for those in the audience who are not MCA members. The Marie Curie Alumni Association is an international nonprofit alumni community for people who currently benefit or have benefited from the Marie Slowska-Curie Actions research funding. Over the years, it has grown into a network of more than 25,000 international researchers, and this webinar series is one of the multiple activities offered to the MCA community by its members. Today's webinar is on cultural diplomacy with a focus on Southern Europe, and you have already seen the webinar will be recorded, so you can watch it also afterwards. I'm particularly happy to moderate it, given my own long-standing interest in culture diplomacy and the broader framework of science diplomacy. In fact, it was 15 years ago that I collaborated with one of our speakers today, was Mauricio Janue Emire, in a research and exhibition project and German-Spanish academic relations in the frame of science and cultural diplomacy. So when I heard about the new book she and her colleagues had published, the book titled Culture Diplomacy in Southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, and Greece in the 20th Century, I considered this to be a topic of interest to our MCA community and beyond. So before I introduce our speakers, I would like to briefly explain that this event connects to our broader effort to mobilize researcher networks to become active participants in policy and science diplomacy, to actively inform political agendas and translate research-driven evidence into actionable policy insights. With this purpose, we held, for instance, a parallel session at the MCA conference in Brussels titled Empowering Research and Networks at Strategic Actors in Science Diplomacy. So the webinar today can be seen in connection to that effort. In the frame of the Science Diplomacy Task Force that I'm currently in charge of within the Policy Working Group, and with a special focus on capacity building measures, and well, also based on my own experience in this field, it's experience on a theoretical and a practical level, I consider the topic of culture diplomacy ideal for this purpose. Culture diplomacy has played a significant role in shaping international relations, scientific cooperations, and cultural exchange since the 19th century and even before. Therefore, considered to be particularly relevant for internationally mobile researchers, the webinar aims to offer insights into how cultural engagement can serve as a bridge to mutual understanding, trust building, and collaboration across diverse political, social, and cultural contexts. So the editors of the recently published book, Cultural Diplomacy in Southern Europe, with its three examples, Spain, Portugal, and Greece in the 20th century, have kindly agreed to discuss the different approaches to and experiences with cultural diplomacy across different cultural contexts. So the webinar will have three parts, or let's say we will be talking specifically about 3 points. The first part of the presentation, here we will introduce the contribution of cultural diplomacy to the historical analysis, the book's theoretical foundation and methodological approach, its objectives, its relevance, and timeliness. In the second part, we will stress the role of cultural diplomacy. We will focus on those instances where scientific and technological issues were decisive in the recovery of Southern European countries after decades of wars, dictators, political isolation, and poverty. In the third part, taking a specific case, which is Catalan art exhibitions abroad in the interwar period, as our starting point, we will explore why art exhibitions are key instruments of cultural diplomacy and to what extent can stateless nations engage in it. So let's come to the presentation of our speakers. So both the book and our discussion will bring together scholars from different fields of contemporary history, art history, and the history of science. I'm going to introduce them individually. Each is going to do a brief presentation of 10 to 12 minutes, and afterwards we will have a Q&A. So, given the circumstance that we might have a broad audience, including scholars who might not be familiar at all with the concept of cultural diplomacy, I would like to ask each of you to begin your contribution with a very general definition of what cultural diplomacy means for you, from your perspective, discipline, and experience. So let's start with Mauricio Janue Imiret. She's a professor of contemporary history at the Department of Humanities at the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, Spain. Her current research interests focus on the role of culture in Spanish-German relations during National Socialism and the re-establishment of Spanish-German cultural diplomacy in the post-war period. Her chapter in the book that I very much encourage you to look at, to read the book. So her chapter is titled Cultural Diplomacy as a Political Resource for Francoist Spain in its relation with Nazi Germany. And here she examines Francoist Spain's cultural diplomacy towards Nazi Germany with a focus on humanities and social sciences. Without any further ado, please start your presentation. As I said, if possible, just giving a brief introduction to the audience or those among the audience who are not too familiar with the concept of such. So what does it mean to you?
I will not speak about my contribution to the book, but about the concept of the book. What it's synonym of what we understand on cultural diplomacy. So my part of the presentation is this general overview about the concepts we would like to know better, and especially I will talk about 4 points: the contribution of cultural diplomacy to the historical analysis, the theoretical foundations and methodological approach of the book, its objectives, and its relevance and timeliness. The book offers a comprehensive overview of how culture, science, technology, and academic activity function as instruments of cultural diplomacy and soft power in Spain, Portugal, and Greece during the interwar and Cold War periods. Building on earlier work by the editors, the book is the main result of a research project funded by the government of Spain. From a historical perspective, cultural diplomacy merits scholarly attention for 2 main reasons. It serves as a valuable indicator of the level of development of the various European states and the position each held in the international order throughout the upheavals of the 20th century, and it has the potential to capture the multidimensional political significance of culture and knowledge, and illustrate how science and culture facilitate transnational communication, particularly at times of political and ideological confrontation. Historically, the relationship between culture and science on the one hand and the state on the other has grown ever closer. With the end of the Cold War and the ensuing changes in the international arena, most Western countries reoriented their foreign policy strategies. There began a phase of transition towards modern cultural cooperation, as intercultural communication became the preferred means of gaining influence in global politics. Against this background, the historical study of cultural diplomacy started to receive greater academic attention. Historical reflection draws attention to the complexity and diversity of the entities, state and quasi-state institutions, private organizations, individuals, commercial enterprises, and so on, that have participated in scientific and cultural diplomacy. The term cultural diplomacy was first used as an analytical concept in the 1960s, but it was not until the 1990s that came into wider use. Cultural diplomacy is distinguished from traditional diplomacy by its reliance on attraction and persuasion as tools of influence rather than economic or military coercion. Cultural diplomacy has thus been identified as a form of soft power, a concept also popularized in the 1990s and defined as the ability to achieve goals through attraction rather than coercion or payments. A country's soft power rests primarily on three resources: its culture, its political values, and its foreign policies. Because culture and knowledge can be communicated across borders, states can use them to advance their interests and strengthen political ties with other countries through cultural diplomacy. In this way, the core values embedded in cultural traditions, rooted in particular worldviews, can be shared through a process of cultural transmission. Intellectuals, historians, artists, and scientists can thus serve as transmitters of a national identity. Because science and culture are perceived as neutral and apolitical, they can be more readily instrumentalized as agents of political representation. Nevertheless, we maintain that science and culture are not essentially apolitical. Through cultural diplomacy, states project an image of their community to the outside world. From this, it follows that science and culture on the one side and politics on the other are interdependent. Most studies on cultural diplomacy focus on the United States and the major European powers. Smaller or less influential states receive far less attention. The historiographical gap is wider still for countries of the European South, often labeled peripheral or semi-peripheral, as Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And yet, recent research shows that countries with limited capacity to project political or economic power have considered cultural diplomacy an accessible and therefore important resource within their strategic arsenal. Despite their specific differences, the three countries share a set of structural conditions during the period examined: persistent economic underdevelopment, political instability, dictatorial regimes, and chronic underinvestment and lack of planning in the cultural, scientific, academic, and technological sectors. These factors shaped but did not prevent the deployment of scientific and cultural diplomacy in each case. The book assumes that focused studies can yield valuable insight into how culture and science function as political resources in international relations. The contributions center on individuals, communities, institutions, and material artifacts, either at a specific moment or over an extended period. They examine the interactions among the actors involved and the strategic, cultural, and socio-political frameworks in which they operated. The book sheds light on the diversity of approaches to cultural diplomacy. The contributing authors examine how each country presents itself abroad and the mechanisms it employs to attract foreign attention. They also analyze which foreign models are emulated or rejected and the underlying reasons for alignment or opposition in each national context. The historiographical objectives of the book can be summarized in the following four. to examine the scientific and cultural diplomacy strategies developed by the Southern European countries, to analyze the value of each country, to analyze the value each country places on scientific and cultural diplomacy, to assess how these diplomatic strategies contributed to shaping each country's subsequent position in the broader international order, and to demonstrate the relevance of scientific and cultural diplomacy in international relations, incorporating the perspective of countries on Europe's southern periphery. We believe that the book is particularly timely for two interrelated reasons. First, although the current geopolitical climate appears to be redefining the role of traditional international actors, cultural diplomacy, in a broad sense, continues to command academic attention. Second, because the idea of a common Europe as an area of freedom and progress has been founded on Europe's reputation as a center of culture and knowledge. The book aims to contribute from a Southern European perspective to a better understanding of contemporary Europe and the world, considering scientific and cultural development as a driver of economic and social modernization. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this, in-depth overview of the concept of the different tools of cultural diplomacy and also the goals of your book. So wonderful! This was a very good start, and based on this, we go to the second speaker. So I would like to welcome José Miguel Pacheco Castelao. He is a professor of applied mathematics at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, and he's a member of the Royal Canary Academy of Sciences. His contribution to the book is called Ramón de Ortiz Translates John von Neumann. In this chapter, he analyzes the translations of scientific books into Spanish. So these were translations mainly from French, but to a lesser extent also from German and English. And in his contribution, he focuses on the important questions of who decides what book is going to be translated, when, and why. So, José Miguel, welcome. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, after the very deep analysis of Mauricio, I think that anything I can say will be something weaker. Well, first of all, I like to say something about how I came to the history of science. Well, I am a physicist. First of all, I was a mathematician, and I became a physicist. And after that, I thought that the history of science is also interesting. And it's much more interesting than physics or mathematics themselves, you know. And then when I started talking about these topics, everything changed. So in the end, we ended in science and diplomacy. So I have a definition which is much, this is not so good as Mauricio's, but I think it's something easier to understand. I'll try to read it because I have it somewhere. I have a cultural must be understood as embracing also the realms of science, technology, medicine. Don't speak anymore of C.P. Snow's book on the two cultures. Don't speak. It's old-fashioned. And diplomacy means all sorts of activities made formally under the overall umbrella of the diplomatic services, as well as other more shadowy zones where many agreements were actually obtained. This is clear when reading the book. You can see that there is diplomacy on one side, and there's something which is subterranean and something in between, all of them working together. So I think that this is just a comment on the definition of cultural diplomacy. And now I go to my my main idea. First of all, I'm talking about my favorite contribution to the book. My favorite contribution is not has anything to do with my topic, but it's chapter 12 by the Portuguese Carlos Vargas, which is entitled Towards the Limelight, Portuguese Culture Diplomacy in the Cold War Period. Well, it's so fine, so well written, that I thought immediately to my mind, it brought to my mind the wonderful subway station in Lisbon called Parque, in the Linea Azul, the blue line. If you've never been to Lisbon, you should go just to see this station. It's so really wonderful, and the chapter is amazing. And then I go to my real topic. It's how I became fascinated by Greek history. Well, everybody thinks that Greek history is something of the antique, but that's not anymore. I must confess that I had no idea about the history of Greece in recent times. And when I started reading about it and I started talking about things like that, I found that this is so complicated, such a mix of cultures, for different cultures, different languages, and different people from many countries all together. And the relationships between Greece and other countries have always been complicated, very complicated. The Balkan zone is such a mess that when I went on reading on Greece in the contributions to the book, I got really fascinated, you know. So I dare say that the most interesting part of the book is everything dealing with Greece. I'm not sure whether I'm right or not, but anyway, that's my idea. Maybe it's because it was completely new for me. Maybe. Who knows? And then I go to make a few very short reflections on some contributions to the book. A number of contributions in the book deal with public health questions, scientific questions, even technological issues, and I will present here some reflections on them and on how they are connected with the aims of the book. For instance, among public health questions, we have two Spaniards. We have Javier Martinez explaining how Spain obtained access to pharmaceutical industry and malaria research through the diplomatic, technical, and industrial efforts of a medical mission from Barcelona to Germany. It was during the Weimar Republic in 1925. So it went quite a lot backwards in time. Then we have in chapter 7, we have Josep Barona studying the complexity, advances, and pitfalls of a Spanish scientific diplomacy when trying to establish health policies in early Francoism, that was between 1937 and 1942. It was the very early, and this is the most interesting chapter as well. So health and public health do deserve a place in this book. Very good place. Then come technologies, engineering, applied science. Here comes a Greek. Vasilios Vogiatsis, in chapter 8, analyzed very thoroughly the dictatorship of Metaxas in Greece. The dictator, who was himself an engineer educated in Germany, put science and technology as the preferred area of Greek cultural diplomacy, thus enhancing relationships with the fascist regimes in the 1930s in Italy and Germany. So it's very deep, the idea that the dictator being himself an engineer, it technology in the point. Then comes my thing, which is the title is Lost in Translation. And well, it's how and why a book was translated into Spanish. My idea, which is not too clear in the book, is that that book should have been translated. But all the problems around it were diplomats didn't want to have anything to do with the question. It's interesting in any case. I am the author, so I cannot say that it's the best thing in the book. Then I have two other Spaniards, Lorenzo Gomez and Oscar Martin, who made a vivid and complete description of the very asymmetrical relationship of Spain and the USA in a complex engineer question in the 1950s, 1970s, during the Cold War space race. Of course, Spanish diplomats would use afterwards any possible successes as highly correlated with the Spanish collaboration, which is not true. Spanish collaboration was in more or less a slave-like collaboration rather than diplomatic. Now, two Greeks, two more Greeks. Here we have a Yanis Fotopoulos and a Statis Arapostatis. I don't know whether I say it right. They depict the complexities involved in the 1945 to 1974, more or less, in reconstructing the Greek telephone network. I think they have invented for the case the expression techno-diplomacy. This is new. This is not in cultural diplomacy, not in scientific diplomacy, but it's techno-diplomacy, which I find it is a real finding. Well, the Greek telephone network was completely damaged after the Second World War, and then the Civil War in Greece and everything. So it was so complicated. And the history, or rather than a history, it's a story. could be a good topic for a comic as well. So can any of you think of anything better than techno-diplomacy? I remember that in Greek, in ancient Greek, techno means also art. Techne is the same as art. So it's very artistic. And then I come to the end of, nearly to the end of my intervention. We have two more chapters on soft power. We have a very, very, very nice chapter by Areti Adamopoulos in Greece, obviously, and how Greece gained its image as a Western country. She offers a panoramic view on how the image of Greece evolved towards a Western standard, stressing the role of the movie industry and the development of all sorts of communication systems during the Cold War. So you can see that I'm following the timeline. And last but not least, we have our colleague, Albert Presas, which is not today with us, but he's also one of the responsible. But Albert tells us that the Spanish science diplomacy is soft power, and he argues that during most of the 20th century, Spanish scientific diplomacy, if any, should be considered as soft power. The reason: Spain mainly was a recipient of foreign science and technology, with little to offer as a reliable partner. So that's all I wanted to tell you. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for outlining the different approaches to cultural diplomacy. I mean, as mentioned, this book focuses only on these three Southern European countries, but still there are so many different approaches that we have seen from your presentation. And also thank for showing your, let's say, academic journey, like how you got to cultural diplomacy. and how you got to the history of science. Like in my case, it's vice versa. I started with the history of science, and then I moved more and more into the field of cultural diplomacy, and I find it very very intriguing. In my case, I started with the, as I mentioned before, the project where we analyzed the German, Spanish, cultural and scientific diplomacy since the mid 19th century to see how that changed over time, how it adapted to different political contexts and ideological movements, etc. So thank you for giving this a broad overview and also for explaining your personal approach. So with that, we pass to the third speaker, Eva Mark. She is an associate professor of art history in the Department of Humanities at the same university, Universidad Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona. Her current research addresses cultural transfers and methodological issues related to patterns of artistic receptions and the ideological and political dimensions of art exhibitions in the first half of the 20th century. Her chapter to the book, as mentioned already briefly, so here it's on the Catalan art exhibition abroad, where she examines the use of art exhibition as instruments of Catalan culture diplomacy during the interwar period, demonstrating how Catalonia as a stateless nation used tools of soft power to raise its international profile, shape how it was perceived abroad, and promote its national interest. So, Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, I'm going to to talk about this subject, but I would like to begin by referring to an episode that took place a few years later, during the Spanish Civil War. An episode from which I have chosen a quote that explains, like few others, the scope of cultural diplomacy. In 1938, when the outcome of the Spanish Civil War was still uncertain, the Spanish ambassador of the Netherlands wrote to the Spanish Minister of State regarding the recent visit of the director of the Spanish National Library to Den Haag and told him, I quote, his visit has confirmed that one of the few but effective means of exerting some influence in the Netherlands and gain access to various circles in this country consists of cultural work, mainly manifested through the presence or dissemination of the works of Spanish intellectuals and holding of exhibitions. And he continues, the aim is to influence foreign intellectual elites so that they, in turn, may lobby their governments in favor of the Spanish Republic. If the plan succeeds, there could be a shift in the positions already adopted, and even it may help to obtain military aid to defend the Republican government and defeat the coup plotters. End of the quote. As we can see, the quote sets out the main reasons why states use cultural diplomacy. Firstly, to raise their profile abroad. Secondly, to change the way they are perceived. And thirdly, to promote their national interests. These same objectives, to which we could add one more, legitimizing their governments, are the very ones pursued by stateless nations such as Catalonia when they deploy their cultural diplomacy tools. In fact, as Joseph Nye, the architect of the concept of soft power, states, for stateless nations such as Catalonia, cultural diplomacy is far more important, as, lacking hard power, it is their only means of exerting influence. We therefore understand cultural diplomacy as a practice not restricted to states. Turning to my specific topic, what happened with the exhibitions of Catalan art held abroad in the 1920s? And what does studying them contribute to the field of cultural diplomacy? As you can imagine, I am only going to introduce a few key points about these exhibitions, which I hope will be enough to understand their scope. Moreover, I shall begin with a spoiler. If anyone believes that the aim of those exhibitions was to showcase Catalonia's distinctive art, or to enhance its prestige or promote its circulation, they are mistaken. Art was the last important factor. The nation was the most important. This is demonstrated, first of all, by the precise moment when the decision was taken to organize these exhibitions in 1919, at a time of a great political unrest in Catalonia for two reasons. Firstly, because the government in Madrid had just blocked the passing of a law that would have allowed Catalonia to govern itself in certain respects. And secondly, because of the disillusionment felt by Catalonia. Even what I try to say here, at Catalonia, yes, which as a national minority within a state that had not participated in the First World War, its rights did not have recognized. In 1919, however, there was one factor in favor of the Catalan political authorities. The Catalan Nationalist Party held a dominant position within the various institutions of the Catalan territory and was determined to explore every avenue, particularly those not previously taken, to raise its international profile and thereby, perhaps, put pressure on the Spanish government to achieve its objectives. It was in that context that, towards the end of that same year, 1919, and not by chance, the director of Barcelona's Art Museum made an unprecedented proposal to hold exhibitions of Catalan art abroad, something that had never been done before. The first of these will take place in Paris, taking advantage of a window of opportunity that had remained open since 1917, when Barcelona hosted the French art saloons that the First World War had prevented from being held in the French capital. The French authorities made it loud and clear when they closed the exhibition. We are in debt to the Catalans. 2 years later, the time had come to collect on that debt. The operation was flawless. It was a matter of reciprocity, a gesture of goodwill, the very same reciprocity that underpinned all the exhibition with a nationalist accent had following the end of the First World War, at a time when it's particularly advantageous to strengthen relations between the allied nations by exhibiting a country's national art abroad and vice versa. To avoid arousing suspicion and prevent the Spanish government from blocking the exhibition of Catalan artists in Paris, the following plan was designed. The exhibitions will be organized by a municipal committee, funded by the city council, which also funded the city museums, but of which neither the mayor nor any leading political figure would be a member. Let us say these were exhibitions with a low profile in terms of political representation, but what mattered was that they could take place and that they were effective as instruments for representing a nation. To that end, the strategy was as follows: to place the right person in the city where the exhibition was to be held, in the first instance in Paris and subsequently in Lisbon and Amsterdam, a delegate who would be the one to make the necessary contacts and ensure a flow of interest in the exhibition. Secondly, the aim was to appoint and pay several Catalan journalists who would relocate to these capitals and who would be responsible, as the documentation states, for the propaganda surrounding these exhibitions. And this strategy worked. In the case of Paris, attention for the exhibition of Catalan artists was guaranteed. The exhibition, held at the Grand Palais, formed part of the Salon d'Automne, one of the most important artistic events of the year. But this attention also focused on highlighting the contrast between Catalan and Spanish art. In other words, the critics, not all of them, but a significant number, emphasized Catalan distinctiveness, the dream objective of the exhibition board. Catalan artists had succeeded in presenting themselves to the world as such, with no ties to any official institution of the Spanish state and through their own organization. Regarding the reception of the exhibitions in Catalonia, it is worth remembering that it was just as important for people here to know that progress was being made in terms of international recognition. I shall refer to the two exhibitions I have not yet mentioned, the 1921 Lisbon exhibition and the 1921 Amsterdam exhibition. In the case of the first, the Catalan press did not refer to the exhibition as such, but to the Catalan mission in Portugal. Often, no artists were mentioned, and the photographs accompanying the reports favor images showing the relationships established between the Catalan delegation and the Portuguese political and intellectual elite. In Amsterdam, the same thing happened, but it went one step further, as the exhibition was opened by the Queen of the Netherlands. This had a huge impact on the press, both here and there. That's why the Catalan curator of the exhibition said, weaving together a sort of avant-la-lettre definition of cultural diplomacy, and with that I shall conclude. The Catalan curator said, the exhibition has sparked the Dutch people's interest not only in our art, but in all the distinctive features of Catalonia. This has earned our region a great deal of goodwill that could not be brought or achieved with all the money or eloquence in the world. And of the quote and of my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also to you for focusing on one specific aspect of or within the larger cultural framework, art, more specifically art exhibition. to focus because we have a broad tool set within the cultural diplomacy framework. So this is one specific aspect, and you have developed it in the context of Catalan art exhibitions and as a way to project Catalan culture on an international stage. So thank you for this very specific approach. As we have mentioned already, unfortunately, the fourth editor of the volume, Albert Presa y Puig, he cannot be here. He is also an associate professor at the University Pompeu Fabra, and his career has mainly focused on knowledge transfer and the role of science and technology. Here we have it again, history of science, role of science and technology in international settings. So this is what led him to cultural diplomacy. So now we come to the Q&A section. As also mentioned before, this session is being recorded, so you have different ways how you can make your questions be heard or read. You can or type it in the chat if you wish, or you can turn on the camera and tell us your question, or you can also do the same without turning the camera on if you prefer. So maybe I have one question just to start with while we are getting other questions. My question is, what I have noticed is that in the recent years, the concept has received so much more attention, really a growing attention, and this has led to a broad array of publications. For example, in the Routledge book series, I have done a search for the term cultural diplomacy, and I found at least 10, 12 publications, like, for example, cultural diplomacy beyond the national interest, or cultural diplomacy and international cultural relations. Or a third one, culture diplomacy and the heritage of empire. As said, these are just 3 examples out of a long list of books that I found. So what are, from your perspective, and I mean all 3 of you, reasons for this rising interest for culture diplomacy in this last years? Does any one of you have an explanation? Any comment on that?
Well, I think I have said some words about this in my presentation. It's there has been an important change in the structure of international relations, and we are really not yet oriented how to characterize it. And but the previous great moment of changing of international relations was after the World Wars, the Second World War. And here is the reflection to think about a method to make international relations without using war or pressure or repression with ambivalences. But I think this was an important issue.
Yeah. Any other comments with regard to this question? Yes, José Miguel?
Well, I have an idea, which I'm not sure if it's the right one or not. But for the time being, I mean that cultural diplomacy is something that is out of fashion. I mean, what I want to say is that anything cultural comes through the filter of main, very big international concerns. I mean, movies, music, anything, which, and all of these concerns are over any state. So it's very difficult to make cultural diplomacy in a classical sense. So
yeah,
to start,
but that's a little bit.
Sorry?
My understanding is that it's also because there is a rising interest for, let's say, different cultures and understanding different cultures. Like, for example, the topic of intercultural communication, intercultural
Yes.
negotiation. These are topics. So maybe it's related to that. We do have another. Were you going to say something else?
Well, I just wanted to say that it's a comic that, for instance, classical literature like Thousand and One Night is mostly known by Disney movies. And many people don't know that this is classical culture. This
Yeah.
is not something just off the pen, you know. So
Yeah.
that was all.
Well, thank you. So we have two
Maybe.
more questions here.
I
Joe?
yeah, I would like to
Okay.
comment, think about this. I think the for me, at the center of cultural diplomacy or scientific diplomacy, it is always something political. So if you say intercultural relations, but the point when you look at it as diplomacy is what has to do with power, not only, so you can see it in different perspectives, but when you look it in the sense of cultural scientific diplomacy is has to do with power, and that I have said before. Changes in international relations, moments of changes in international relations, historically has had to do with new perspectives in cultural and scientific diplomacy. First World War, Second World War, etc. But that is one way. But the other way is other forms to understand power. We have not yet looked at it enough. And I have an example from of yesterday.
If you could,
Okay.
say briefly, because we have already like 4 or 5 more questions, and we have
Okay.
3 more minutes to go. So, sorry, I would like to get to as many questions as possible. We have, 3 more minutes. We can continue a bit further. What I would suggest is if for each question, if only one of you could answer and maybe a brief answer, so that would be ideal if possible. Let's go to the first question. As in modern day, cultural importance seems to be on decline, especially for smaller countries, wherein bigger countries impose their cultural identities. What is your take on this? How can cultures from such smaller countries be saved using diplomacy as a tool? Who of you has a brief
Well,
answer to that?
I think now, like in the time that I study my exhibitions, the Catalan culture is, the Catalonia is the same as small country now or 100 years before, and we still have to use the only tools that we have. So the heritage, art, and language. Everybody knows what happened in the 2017 with all the problems that we had, just to try to hear the voices abroad, no? So I think even in that time that everything is mixed, is necessary that we still defend and we still not fight, but really we must be sure that this heritage, the language, the art, the tradition is our, no, it's 100 years before and now are that values are not are the same, no, and we must use, I think, I'm not sure in the same way, but the value of that items are the same for me.
Yeah, thank you. So another question we have here is, I see that everybody preferred to type in the question instead of talking over the camera. So what is the role of artists who traditionally produce and promote culture through techno and conveying cultural diplomacy?
Well, nowadays, I'm not going to talk about what the artists actually think or what they do because I think I'm not authorized. I mean, I'm studying on the 15th century, the 19th, the 20th century, and this is really changed a lot. I think how a lot of times now, the artists are more an agents that participate, that have a very active presence, no? But in that moment, in the moment of my exhibitions, I think the artists have been used for the Catalan political authorities. But the artists are agree with that because it's not because there is a point that they share the same idea. The artist, if you see, for example, for instance, the correspondence between Joan Miró when he arrived in Paris in 1920, in 20, he says to the colleagues, "I am Catalan. I hear. I mean, they converge. No, the ideas that they are doing different, or they feel different. So it's a little bit a legitimate idea. I mean, it's not that the Catalan authorities wrapped, no, the Catalan artists to do an dirty exhibition, but the Catalan artists, they thought, okay, and of course it's a big opportunity, no, because to show their art of works in the Grand Palais with French artists, is they see like a huge opportunity, of course.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
they close the mouth and in the correspondence and in the documentation, I cannot find a disappointing voice. Maybe
Yeah.
because they have no time to produce the better work of art. Maybe because it's only 2 weeks, but other non-significant aspects. No, no,
Yeah.
no, not big things.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So we're getting more and more questions, yeah, which is good. So we extend a few minutes. Another question is for any of the three of you, asking for a brief answer if possible. Do you think that now in the 21st century, because your book focuses on the 20th century, so we're now in the 21st century, are there any new challenges that could or should be addressed through the tool set of cultural diplomacy? Like anything that our new century has added to your findings based on the 20th century? And a brief answer to that?
I have not made research on 21st century, but I have read a little theoretically about cultural diplomacy and the history of cultural diplomacy. And in my presentation, I have mentioned that nowadays uh, uh, the specialists speak more of cultural cooperation instead of cultural diplomacy, with the idea that in the 20th or the end of the 19th century, there was very present the competitive element with hierarchies of cultures. And the idea today, it is uh, it is not to reinforce this element, but try to cooperate, and that it's not so evident the political reason or the geopolitical reason is there, but they cultural diplomacy or cultural cooperation has to play with these elements in a more not so evident
Mm-hmm.
art, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So here we have this is not a question, it's a comment from Odila Triebel. Thank you for this interesting discussion. Maybe I can draw your attention to one of the leading libraries in this niche discipline, the IFA library. And IFA, that is in Germany, in Stuttgart, it's the Institute for Foreign Cultural Relations. I know that because I've been working for them and in the frame of another research project. And so she points to the IFA library, which is an academic library specializing in international cultural relations and foreign cultural educational policy. The collection consists of 500,000 volumes, more than 50,000 journals, and 120,000 international research articles in 100 languages. And if you look at the chat, there you have a link to the library. And yes, I've been in that library, so it's really wonderful for anyone who is interested in this topic. Thank you, Odila, for adding this information and for joining the conversation. Here we have another comment. Fernando Josa Prado, he says, I agree with Mauricio. Diplomacy is to do with internal and external politics and geopolitics. The other issues, we could call them internationalization, for example. Do you have any brief comment, or shall we pass to the next question? Any comment on that? No. So here we have a question.
For me,
Yes.
one question is, where is the link? I don't see the link to the
Do you
live.
see?
It's at the end of her comment. If you go to the chat, and then you see a comment by Odila Triebel,
Now.
Just send you now the
now.
link.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
And then at the end of her
Now. I couldn't see
yeah.
it.
If not, if for any reasons you don't find it, reach out to me. I'm happy to provide it because this is really a wonderful source. And it's also a wonderful institution to work with. So that is another thing that I can highly encourage you to do. So here we have a question. We need to think, is history is still relevant?
Yes, to analyze.
Yes. Could you precise your question in context with the
Well, I
culture?
had the chance to look to the book, and it seems to me that this comparative perspective it's quite complicated in this context of science and diplomacy, what we discussed before. Well, yeah, if somebody wants to comment the comparative perspective, that's fine.
You are right. It is very difficult, and the book is a beginning. And for us, it was difficult to decide which countries and why these countries, because if you say Southern Europe,
But I'm interested how you choose the countries. So that was
that's the history. That's the history. It was we had a very big discussion looking for and the concept of periphery, what we understand for periphery. Why not take Italy? What is with Central Europe? Why not? And a resume it could be we had to decide, and we could not take so much countries. Well, the beginning, it was the project was on Spain, and we have edited the first book on Spain, and at the second, we said if we want to know if it's right what we think about Spain, we need to compare a little, and at the end, we took South Mediterranean. But
so
it was difficult because
so
Greece,
it's a comparative perspective or not? Well, I have to be honest, I didn't read the whole book, so I didn't have the chance to read the whole book. So maybe we can talk after I will read the whole book and let you know exactly if
it's not the last book about what is we present at the introduction some questions, and all the contributions answer to one or more of these questions, but there's not a contribution that is a comparison of one question in because I think this was not possible at this stage. I have to uh, uh, our Greek colleagues, we had to discuss with them what do we mean with cultural diplomacy, because we have read their contributions and thought here are interesting points for our concept of cultural and scientific diplomacy, but they did not know what was this, what this perspective was.
I also think that the contribution are based on your individual research projects, so it does not necessarily have a comparative character, but of course it invites to draw a comparison between different aspects among the countries. But I understand that this has not necessarily been the goal of the book. Very quickly, we have, yes, we can now find the link to the research library, again posted by Ashish and Gabriela as well. And well, Odila Trivers, she adds to her to her comment that they are going to acquire now your book, yeah, for the library. So your book will be in their library as well, yeah. So to make it complete, yeah. And George, he wanted to add a quick point. So would you like to do that by speaking or typing?
Yes, if I am allowed, just a very quick point. First of all, thank you for the very interesting presentation. I think that most of us would like to have a follow-up and more details about the role of cultural diplomacy today. Now, what I had in mind is that the role of personalities, let's say artists who produce the culture, and in my mind, cultural diplomacy can be used by governments, as you mentioned, to promote power. But it can also be used by individuals, by artists, to promote peace and work against government. In my mind, I had Picasso, who left the dictatorship of Franco from Spain and moved to France. And from there, he promoted resistance against the dictatorship in Spain. Another example in Greece was Melina, who moved from Greece again to France and worked against the dictatorship here in Greece. So we have two different ways to promote the cultural diplomacy. One used by governments, let's say as it is done today by Trump sometimes, where the artists themselves they oppose. They say, okay, please don't use my music in your shows, in your presentations. So this is a complicated, complex matter in my mind. So if you could elaborate on this, but perhaps in a follow-up presentation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Either any one of you has like a really, really brief comment on that?
only to tell so to George that we discuss this point a lot, and even the four editors of the book, we are not agrees. No, we were not agree because of course it's the diplomacy, the cultural diplomacy. It is only when the government is involved, or what happens with the director of the cinemas and the singers, and that opens a world. I mean, we try to manage at least not only when is a state behind, just a nation can be, but we put apart that initiatives that are working like for personal interest. I mean, not personal, but if you open this melon, in Catalan we say if we open this melon, in English it must be another expression. If you open that box, then you only can be damaged, because it's another conceptualization and thinking about the agents, individual agents with interest or no interest, with legitimate interest or not, with personal and economical interest or only political ones. So the only thing to say is that we really fight about all the things, and we didn't find the solution.
Well, thank you. I
The
think,
Pandora box.
yeah.
Pandora
I think
box, exactly.
what becomes clear from this webinar is that we have not, let's say, covered the topic in a full or complete way. No, it's quite the opposite. Can only be the beginning. So we're
Yes.
starting to venture
Oh,
into this
wonderful.
really fascinating field. So I'm very happy about this lively discussion, and it's always good to stop at a point when there's a lot of interest, yeah, because maybe there will be a follow-up to this webinar. So I greatly appreciate the time and effort of the speakers dedicated to sharing their work and experience in this webinar. Thank you also to the audience for this vivid conversation, for the information that you have shared. This is really wonderful. And to the audience, I hope that you also found the discussion insightful and maybe even inspiring to start your own path into this exciting field. So again, thank you very much to everyone. I wish you a wonderful weekend. And yes, we hear here. Thank you. Yes. And well, there's another recommendation to read an article in Nature. If you like, you can have a quick look at this article. And yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to the speakers and
Thank you,
thank you to the
Sandra. Thank
audience.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.